Welcome and good afternoon, or good morning or evening if you're watching this on your own time. I'm here to talk to you today about taking your digital transformation journey to innovation. I'm Prakriti Koller from Red Hat Services, and let's go through this. So let's start it all off with who am I, and why am I here talking to you about this today? So I work for Red Hat. I'm our North America Agile Lead and our PMO for services. I love Agile and I love everything about it, and I love teaching it to people and applying it, and just the core of it. I enjoy talking about it and believing in it. And part of that comes in because I'm a collaborator by nature. I love sticking my nose in places where wherever I want, and sharing my ideas. I'm very open, and I love talking things through, and that comes from my background of being a developer and getting into management. And then now I have this management problem that I just can't seem to get rid of. And it's been a journey in the past 7 years with Red Hat, going from that technical experience, then building that foundation into this, going into project management, and then getting into Agile, being an Agile coach for our Open Innovation Labs team in residencies and a couple of our other services projects. And really what I did through that whole journey was really understand what practices we're using. Why are we being successful? Why are our teams working the way that they work? And how can we recreate this in more teams and have more people that have this positive culture that they work in? So that introduced me to the Open Practice Library, which is something that I'm going to talk about today. That Red Hat is developing, that helps our consulting teams and can help your delivery teams to see what tools are available to them to enhance their delivery. So before we even get started in all this, we have to think about where we're trying to get to, right? What does it take to get to innovation? What does innovation even mean? And just because you're starting this digital transformation journey, does that mean that your end state is going to be one of an innovative company? And do all digital transformations sort of lead up to that? And realistically, what we're seeing is different companies are handling and use a digital transformation in different ways. And what we want to try doing is making it more than just revamping technologies and processes. We want to be able to use those changes to actually impact how we as an IT organization deliver value. And a lot of times people will think of, scope their effect to just the IT organization because that's where they're in. But realistically, the way that your IT org delivers can really affect the whole company culture. You can do this by excelling at your software delivery performance and really working on improving and building that day by day. You can adopt changes as an organization to make delivery more sustainable and make it easier for people to get what they're looking for from the IT organization. You also want to take a step back and see how you are measuring and tracking your success. You want to be using these healthy organization level outcomes that help guide us and see that, hey, is this thing that we're trying out, is that helping us in the right way? Are these improving the metrics that we set out to improve? And finally, through all of the products and things that we're creating as an IT org, driving real business value using outcome first delivery, making sure that we understand the purpose and the why behind the work to really inspire us to deliver the best product and value that the whole organization benefits from. So we want to get to this point where, innovation happens when people are free to think, experiment, and speculate. And it's really not something that can be forced. You have to create the environment for it. And so what we want to do to do that is see where you are today. You always have to start with a baseline. So we want to think through sort of observing the 5 elements in your IT organization. There's these different pieces of this IT org. You have your leadership teams, you have your product, you have your development, and your architecture, and lastly, your operations. And these 5 elements work together in a synchronous way to deliver some value to the organization. When we started observing these 5 elements, This conversation started as an explanation of patterns of failure. When we talk about digital transformation, we're understanding, we're seeing all these surveys that come back with, 80% of digital transformations fail, 4 out of 5. And we started thinking about, why are those happening? What are those common patterns that we're seeing across those use cases that can inform us on how to better do digital transformation in the future? And that leads us to these sort of failures, right? We see there's situations where leadership is preventing change, where product teams, they're building things that the market doesn't really want. It doesn't really matter, and not delivering real value. Development might be building the wrong things, not meeting all the requirements that have been, delivered to them by the product team. Architecture, maybe the way that the product is set up is not conducive to quick and sustainable delivery. You're building things in the wrong way. And the architecture just can't support the speed at which we want to deliver at. And lastly, operations, with incidents and outages, right? These are those moments of failure that we see that these things aren't supporting our transformation the way that we want it to. So when this conversation starts as a pattern of failures, it develops, and that develops into these 5 opportunities. That each of these different elements of the IT org can deliver value to the transformation in different ways. Your leadership can provide strong executive sponsorship. Your product teams are, they can start building their requirements in a more strategic, valuable way that the market desires. Developers make sure that they're delivering the features that they're asked for, doing this in an iterative way to make sure that they're staying up to date with what the requirements are and are adjusting to any changes that are needed. Architecture is making that setup in your organization to make the right thing the easy thing to do, and set up all the tools and pieces and templates that and structure that your development teams can leverage to build things in a smooth way, and so that they work with each other. And lastly, operations teams, right? Keeping those systems running, and minimizing as many failures and hiccups that happen there. So when you're looking at these 5 elements, do the check. How connected and aligned are these 5 elements in your organization? And all of these connections that are happening, is there a way that we can ingrain those connections into our company's cultures so that we can enable the best version of our teams to deliver? So when it comes to this question, once again, right, we're reminded that we can't really force innovation. What we have to do is build the best environment in which innovation can grow. So we ask ourselves, what type of environment is really most conducive to innovation? And we've found a few things. It's important to be safe, to be inspired, and be open. When we talk about safety, everybody on the team has to make psychological safety a priority. And you can do this by deep, active listening, paying attention to the people that are on your team, building group vulnerability, and reducing fear. You want the working environment to be safe so that it brings out the best ideas, and everybody feels comfortable with each other. And that trust makes for a stronger team. You want to be inspired, and you want to do this by creating transparency around the context of work, starting your conversations with why things are happening and understanding the purpose and vision beyond it. And once you understand that vision, not just keeping that to yourself, but sharing it. You want to have, some of the strongest teams that we've seen, have had this concept of a shared vision. When you ask them, well, what is this group driving towards? They have a very clear and quick answer of what that end goal looks like. And lastly, as a leader, is making sure that you're leading with authenticity. There's nothing more inspiring than having a leader that truly believes in the vision that they are trying to, that we want to work together to build. And lastly, is this open environment, is you want to invite innovation by opening up the type of collaboration that's happening. You want to open up your teams, make sure you have diversity in your teams so that you're getting new perspectives and new ideas constantly and in different ways. set aside time for teams to innovate and improve on their own processes. The workers are closest to the work, and they're the best. The most expert. They have the most expert opinion on how they can best improve their ways of working. And lastly, creating an environment for experimentation. So this one kind of falls under open, but also goes back to safety, where it's not just about psychological safety, but it's the safety of your environment. Do we feel as though we have enough guardrails in how things are set up to create this environment for experimentation, that we can try things with low impact, but we can measure and see whether they're succeeding or not, so we can scale up. So this is how you can generate more ideas, starting at a small scale, allowing people to experiment and to innovate, and open yourselves up to new ideas. So Red Hat has created a repository, this open source repository driven by a global community called Open Practice Library. And these are pretty much a collection of a lot of the practices that we use to guide conversations, to keep our conversations and dialogues outcome driven. Remember, focusing on that purpose and that why. Practices from the Open Practice Library, commonly known as OPL, it really helps ask the right questions so that we're getting the right level of answers. And you can really use this, OPL as this, it's a giant repository. There's over 100 practices on there. It really is a toolbox for driving those discussions, is going there, browsing through some of the practices that are available, seeing what your need is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, and are there some practices that can help you solve that. And this website has, it's just a collection of all of those where you can, follow some steps that actually give us a tactical way to foster our safe environment that we're trying to create for innovation, to figure out a way that we can inspire these conversations that align people. And lastly, all of these practices are ways to open your participants to collaborating. And these practices are tried and true. We've used them in our services projects. We've been sharing them with customers. We want more people to, these are probably practices that might be familiar to you as well. And what we want to do is just grow this repository and try out different techniques and see what works, and share that feedback. Since there are so many practices in Open Practice Library, one of the things that we can start with is funneling into some of the important practices that if we, as we're starting to talk about outcome-driven delivery, what open practices can we use to sort of help us create, build, and share those outcomes? So if you don't know what outcomes your team is striving for and you need some practices that can help define your outcomes, you can use practice like Start at the End, which is originally from the book Sprint by Jake Knapp. There's another one called Cover Stories, which these things sort of, you work with the team to establish what your future state looks like, what your outcomes really are. If you want to improve the quality of your outcomes and make better outcomes, there's some practices that can help with that. There's things like target outcomes and empathy mapping, making sure that there's a human element to your outcomes, that all of these business changes that we're making are effectively, essentially they affect humans at the end of the day. And we want to see and measure things based on that level of outcome. So you can do these things by using some of these practices. And lastly, if you understand your work that you're trying to do, but you're not sure how it connects to your high-level outcomes, your team outcomes, or you don't have the right context for it, you can use a few practices like Opportunity Solution Tree or building a 2D backlog to help you align your work that you're doing to these shared outcomes. Each of these practices that are listed below are links, and I think we will be able to have our slides available at the end of this, and we can share out the resource links. So when we talk about what is a good outcome and how is this, how can you make your outcomes valuable to your organization? These outcomes are helping us connect with people in the org, right? You have people at different levels. You have your developers who are, actually doing the shorter time scale on a by sprint basis, delivering, their tech work. And you have your leaders that are aiming for this high level impact for, what the business is trying to drive. And you want outcomes to be somewhere in the middle of those, and something that everybody can kind of align on. And so you want to make sure that you have good outcomes that people are aligning on. And this is actually what makes it good, is the fact that it's something that connects different levels of people. And so you want to make sure that it's reflecting some intended change. You're describing whose behavior is actually changing, and making it measurable, or understanding, how it can be measured. Are there direct things, or are there indicators that you can track? And this really helps us not just create an outcome and align on it, but also to track it later. Is when we actually deliver some work, let's look back at the outcomes that we started with, and did we make the changes that we were driving towards? So there's a lot of good thought leadership around this. One of my favorite books is Outcomes Over Outputs by Josh Seiden. It's a really quick read, maybe 30 to 40 minutes. And there's a lot of talk behind why customer behavior is what makes an outcome, and how that your outcome is a change in human or team behavior that drives a business result. And ultimately, that any changes in process or technology, which when we're thinking of a digital transformation, it's usually what comes to mind. But those changes in technology, they ultimately wind up affecting human behavior. And that behavioral change is actually what can drive things like revenue and profits and mission success. And lastly, when I say good, I mean good. At the end of the day, if we are making, where we're aligning on how we want to change people, let's think a little bit about the ethics behind that as well. And if we're doing something to change users' behaviors, what is the real impact of that, both short term and long term? It's our responsibility as people in the tech industry to make sure that we're designing ethical things. So as I've been mentioning, right, is using these outcomes to align, is an extremely helpful tool. So you start off, when we have these conversations, you want to start with why. What is that long-term impact that we're driving towards? What's that shared vision? This is something that should come from the leaderships. And then you have that answers the how question. How are we going to deliver that long-term impact? And this is where we come to our sort of next level of outcomes. And you can see how we can sort of tier these outcomes. So then we have our business outcome, which is more of, in order to reach that long-term impact, what are the measurable things we can do in the short term to drive our business? And then at a more deliverable level, what are the different tactical things that we want to do to achieve that business outcome? And this is, as you can see, it gets a little more granular and gets to the more tactical side. It goes from strategy to the tactics. And that's what really helps. These middle level, the how and the business outcomes and the deliverable outcomes, are what can help align across an organization. And then that gets us to the what question, which this is the level that our teams are working on today with the projects and the deliverables that they're doing. And by mapping and tiering your outcomes like this, you can answer your questions about, at an organizational level, what outcomes are we trying to improve? Are these internal effects that we're trying to make, or are these external? Are these affect our users, our customers? And at a team level, you should really understand, what outcome is my work driving? This work that I'm doing, how does it connect to what our business picture is? So when you use these, once you create and tier these outcomes, you can use them to connect across your organization. So your leadership teams, they want to paint this long-term vision. And your delivery teams, they want a concrete plan that they can execute on in the short term. And you can see that these conversations are happening at different timescales, right? Your leadership teams are probably thinking at a 3 to 5 year scale, maybe more than that. And your delivery teams are thinking, well, what do I need to do this sprint? I want to know what my plan for this quarter is. So what you can do is use these outcomes to find this common goal to align on in the midterm, and use it to measure often. And that way your leadership teams can see how the work is driving towards their outcomes that they set out. And the delivery team has an understanding of when they deliver a small chunk of work, they can see what impact it's driving towards. The way that you can track all of this is, of course, by measuring progress. Measuring these shared outcomes is something that should be easy and happen often, and you want to repeatedly be able to do this cycle. Of course, at a very beginning, you have to start with collecting and understanding your baseline. No matter what metric it is, you got to know where you are now so that you can assess and improve beyond that. Which takes us to the next step, which is assess, right? You want to analyze your current state, identify where your most valuable improvement opportunities might be, then execute, define an experiment, focus on a specific deliverable that has this target improvement on a specific metric that you're trying to drive, and what change you're kind of looking for. So define that and then deliver it. And then once you've delivered that experiment, then you have to go back and remeasure. So you want to recapture those metrics to either validate or disprove your hypothesis and see, should we continue working in this direction, or do we need to make a pivot because it's not actually achieving the goals that we set out to do? So keeping in mind that this is the process that we want to follow in general, and we want this to be done in an easy and quick and easy way. So what we've explored a little bit is what's a way that we can use existing data to measure healthy organizational outcomes. And what we started with was a software delivery performance, which is talked about in the book Accelerate, if you've read that, by Nicole Forsgren and Gene Kim and Jez Humble. So Accelerate is a great book where they talk about how software delivery performance affects, beyond, through an organization. And they break down that software delivery performance into 4 key metrics. They talk about lead time to change, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and change failure rates. And these 4 measures sort of build up to this outcome of software delivery performance, which is an organizational outcome that we want, different teams can drive towards. So what we've started building is an open source tool called Polaris that can run on your OpenShift cluster that creates a dashboard using Prometheus and Grafana that creates this organizational transparency around trends towards these shared outcomes. So right now we're taking build and deployment data. We're linking into things like Jira for failures. We have different sources for commit information, and you can sort of plug in different pieces and configure Polaris to automatically calculate software delivery performance at a point in time and also as sort of a trending basis. So you can track these numbers and see whether you're driving in the correct direction or not. And the next outcome that we're working on is something along the lines of supported technology adoption, is how when we're building this architecture, you have common patterns, and how your organization, adopts those technologies and how that affects different pieces, and looking at that at an organizational level. So this is all open source and available in a repo, and we can share the link to that as well. So some of the takeaways from this conversation is you can take some of these individual and team actions back to your teams and open your culture a little bit more. On an individual level, try to listen better, understand the business impact behind your work. And when you're making decisions and you're sharing it with your teams, share the context behind it too. Why was this decision made? This helps everybody be more aligned and understand why teams are going in the directions that they're going. And then on a team level, you want to align on a vision, welcome diversity into your teams, architect with innovation in mind. How can we make this a safe place for experiments so that we can try new things and learn from them and build something better? And lastly, measuring success in healthy ways, focusing on outcomes over outputs. It's not just a matter of the lines of code that you're delivering. It's what that code is doing, and measuring your success in a way that maps to that. And also, there's a couple of open source communities that I mentioned today. open practice library. You're free to browse, browse, use, contribute, improve, all of the above. Please, where we love making this as open of a community as we can, and so we welcome all feedback. And also Polaris is installing a tool that helps you visualize those organizational trends by collecting data from existing sources. So with that, I want to thank you so much for joining. I'm Prakriti. I'm from Red Hat, and if you want to learn more about the different things that I was talking about, I'd love to hear from you. My email is listed here, and thank you so much for listening.